He signed the termination papers on a Tuesday afternoon, barely looking up from his desk. The woman standing across from him had scrubbed his floors for 3 years, folded his clothes, dusted the corners of rooms he never entered. He didn't know her favorite color. He didn't know she took night classes. And he certainly didn't know that inside her, barely 12 weeks along, was the only child who would ever carry his DNA. By the time he discovered the truth, she had already disappeared into a life he would spend years trying to find. This is a story about what we fail to see when we refuse to look, about the cost of pride, and about a secret so quietly devastating that when it finally surfaced, it shattered a man who thought he was untouchable. Who was she really? Why did she hide a child from him? What did he do that made forgiveness nearly impossible? And why did it take a medical emergency 3 years later for him to realize that the woman he had once dismissed without a second thought had given him the one thing his wealth could never buy? Power does not always protect you from loss. Sometimes it blinds you to it. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the pieces of our future in their hands, waiting for us to notice. But by the time we do, the door has already closed. His name was Daniel. 51 years old, self-made, calculated. He built his fortune in commercial real estate, buying properties other investors were too afraid to touch and turning them into empires. His home was a testament to that success. Marble floors that echoed when you walked, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake, rooms so large they felt like museums. But museums are cold, and so is Daniel. He had been married once, years ago, to a woman who left him for his business partner. The betrayal didn't break him. It froze him. After that, he built walls that no amount of money could scale. He kept people at arm's length, especially those who worked for him. To Daniel, staff were invisible, interchangeable, part of the machinery that kept his life running smoothly. He noticed when the floors were dirty. He didn't notice the person cleaning them. Her name was Claire, 34, soft-spoken, with eyes that had seen more than most people her age. She had come to the city 6 years earlier after her mother passed away from cancer, leaving behind medical debt that swallowed everything Claire had saved. She had a degree in literature, once dreamed of teaching, but life had other plans. So she cleaned houses. She was good at it, not just at scrubbing tiles or folding fitted sheets, but at being invisible, which is what people like Daniel required. Claire worked for him 3 days a week. She learned his routines. Black coffee at 6, calls with London at 7. He hated small talk, hated clutter, hated being asked personal questions. So she never asked. She just worked quietly, efficiently, and when her shift ended, she disappeared like steam. But Claire noticed things about Daniel that he didn't notice about himself. She saw the untouched dinner plates, the prescription bottles for insomnia lined up in his bathroom cabinet, the way he stood at the window some mornings, staring at nothing, his jaw tight. She saw loneliness, and though she never said it out loud, she recognized it because she carried the same weight. Loneliness has a way of finding itself, even in silence. Especially in silence. For 3 years, they existed in the same space but different worlds. He never knew she listened to jazz while cleaning the guest rooms. She never knew he sometimes paused his work just to hear another person moving through the house. They were two people orbiting the same emptiness, never close enough to collide. Until the night the power went out. It was March, late evening, the kind of cold rain that turns roads into mirrors. Claire had stayed late to finish the second-floor hallway. Daniel was in his office, on a call that had gone badly. Then the lights died. The backup generator failed. The house went black and silent, save for the rain hammering the roof. Claire had been in the linen closet. She stepped out carefully, using her phone's flashlight. That's when she nearly walked into him. Daniel was standing in the hallway, phone in hand, looking more irritated than concerned. For the first time in 3 years, there were just two people stuck in the dark, stripped of roles. He exhaled. She apologized. And then, awkwardly, they both laughed. It was a small sound, but it cracked something open. They ended up in the kitchen. Daniel found candles. Claire made tea on the gas stove, her hands steady even though her heart wasn't. They sat across from each other at the island, and for reasons neither of them could later explain, they started talking. Real talking. Not about work or weather, but about life. He told her about his ex-wife, about how success had cost him trust. She told him about her mother, about the debt, about dreams deferred. He listened in a way that surprised her. She spoke in a way that surprised him. The storm kept the power out for 4 hours. By the time the lights flickered back on, something between them had shifted. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was connection. And for two people, that lonely connection felt like oxygen. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't reckless or wild. It was quiet, hesitant, and painfully human. They stayed up talking until past midnight. The conversation drifted into silence, but neither of them moved to leave. And then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and impossible, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They slept together that night, not in passion, but in something closer to desperation. Two people trying to remember what it felt like to be seen. When Claire woke up the next morning, Daniel was already gone. There was no note, no text, just the faint smell of his cologne on the pillow and the cold realization that the night before had meant two very different things to two very different people. The days that followed were excruciating. Daniel returned to his usual routine as if nothing had happened. He was polite, distant, unreachable. Claire understood. She didn't expect anything, but it still hurt. She told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness they both needed to forget. So she kept cleaning his house, kept her head down, kept her heartbreak folded neatly where he couldn't see it. And then, 5 weeks later, she missed her period. At first, she told herself it was stress. But deep down she knew. The test confirmed it on a Sunday morning in the bathroom of her studio apartment. 2 pink lines. She sat on the edge of the tub for an hour, staring at them, trying to figure out what came next. She thought about telling him. She rehearsed it a dozen ways. But every time she imagined walking into his office, imagining his reaction, she felt her stomach turn. And then one afternoon, while vacuuming near his office, she overheard him on a call. He was talking to someone about a housekeeper he'd had to let go the month before. His exact words were, "They're all replaceable. You pay them. They work. That's the transaction. Don't complicate it." Claire stood frozen, the vacuum still humming in her hand. That was the moment she decided. She would not tell him. She would not beg. She would not let her child become a complication in a transaction. She would leave quietly and raise this baby on her own terms. Because silence, she told herself, wasn't weakness. It was survival. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 16:9. 2 weeks later, Claire made a mistake. A small one. She knocked over a vase while dusting. It was an accident, the kind that happens when you're exhausted and nauseated and trying to hide a pregnancy from a man who barely looks at you. The vase shattered. It wasn't expensive, but Daniel had been in a foul mood that week, and when he saw it, something in him snapped. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked at her with cold disappointment and said, "I expect more care than this. If you can't manage it, I'll find someone who can." Claire apologized, but the damage was done. The next morning, she received an email from his assistant. Her services were no longer needed. Severance pay would be transferred within the week. No explanation, no conversation, just gone. Claire didn't fight it. She packed her supplies, left her key on the counter, and walked out of Daniel's mansion for the last time. He never asked why she didn't argue, never wondered why she looked so pale. He had already moved on, interviewing replacements by that afternoon. To him, she had been a brief lapse in judgment followed by necessary correction. He told himself he felt nothing, and for a while he believed it. But in the weeks that followed, the house felt different. Quieter, emptier. He caught himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway. He hated that he noticed. So he buried it, the same way he buried everything else. Claire moved to a smaller town 2 hours away, closer to an old friend who offered her a couch and then a room. She found work cleaning offices at night. The pay was less, but the hours were flexible, and nobody asked questions. She went to her prenatal appointments alone. She built a crib by herself, using instructions from a YouTube video. And when her daughter was born on a rainy October morning, Claire held her and wept, not from sadness, but from relief. relief that this tiny human was hers, that no one could take her, that she had made the right choice, even if it was the hardest one. She named her Emma. Emma had Daniel's eyes. Claire saw it immediately, but she never said his name out loud. As far as Emma would know, her father was a chapter that closed before it began. 3 years passed. Claire built a life. It wasn't glamorous. She worked 2 jobs, lived paycheck to paycheck, but Emma was healthy and loved and never went to bed hungry. That was enough. Claire didn't date, didn't look back. She had made peace with her choices. Meanwhile, Daniel's life continued in its precise, predictable pattern. He expanded his business, bought another property, attended galas. But something had changed. He found himself distracted, irritable. He went through 4 housekeepers in 2 years. None of them stayed long. He told himself it was because they weren't competent. But the truth, the one he wouldn't admit, was that none of them were her. He didn't know why Claire had left so abruptly. Didn't know why it bothered him. He just knew that sometimes, late at night, he thought about that storm, about her voice in the dark, and he hated himself for it. Then, on a cold morning in November, Daniel's assistant called him with news that stopped him mid-step. There had been an accident, a multi-car pileup on the interstate involving a charity Van Daniels Foundation had sponsored. Several people were injured. One was a woman named Claire. Same last name, same age range. He felt his chest tighten. He told himself it was a coincidence. Common name, but he couldn't shake it. He made a call, pulled some strings, got the hospital records, and there it was. Claire Howard, former employee, emergency contact, none, next of kin, a 3-year-old daughter named Emma. Daniel stared at the paper for a long time. Then he got in his car and drove to the hospital. Claire was unconscious when he arrived, recovering from surgery. But Emma was there, sitting in the waiting room with a social worker, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and scared. Daniel saw her from across the room, and the world stopped, because those eyes, those exact eyes, stared back at him every morning in the mirror. The shape of her face, the way her mouth curved. It wasn't possible, but it was. He walked over slowly, crouched down to her level. The social worker started to intervene, but he showed his ID, explained his connection to Claire. Emma looked at him, curious, unafraid, and Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest that he thought had been sealed forever. He asked the social worker one question. When was Emma born? She told him. He did the math, and he knew. For 3 days, Daniel stayed at that hospital. He paid for Claire's treatment. He made sure Emma was cared for. And when Claire finally woke up, groggy and confused, the first thing she saw was him sitting in the chair beside her bed. Panic flashed in her eyes. He saw it. He raised a hand gently, his voice low. "I know," he said. "That's all. Just those 2 words." Claire's eyes filled with tears. Not from relief. From fear. Fear that he would take Emma. Fear that he would hate her. Fear that everything she had built would crumble. But Daniel didn't yell. Didn't accuse. He just asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" And Claire, exhausted and raw, told him the truth. Every word of it. She told him about the night of the storm. About the pregnancy. About overhearing his call. About being fired. About choosing silence because she believed it was the only way to protect her daughter from becoming a burden, a complication, a regret. She told him she didn't want his money, didn't want his pity. She wanted Emma to be loved, not obligated. And when she finished, her voice barely a whisper, Daniel sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. Because he realized, in that moment, that he had done this. Not with cruelty, but with coldness. With a lifetime of treating people like transactions. And it had cost him 3 years with his daughter. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply said, "I want to know her, if you'll let me." Claire looked at him for a long time. She saw something different in his face. Not the man who had fired her. Not the man who had turned cold the morning after. But someone humbled. Someone scared. Someone trying. She didn't say yes right away. But she didn't say no. And that was enough for Daniel to hope. Over the following months, he showed up. Not with gifts or grand gestures. But with time, he learned Emma's favorite songs. He sat on the floor and built block towers. He asked Claire questions and actually listened. He paid her medical bills without making her feel small. He offered support without demands. Slowly, carefully, trust began to grow where there had only been silence. It wasn't a fairy tale. Claire didn't fall back into his arms. Daniel didn't transform overnight. But they learned to coexist, to co-parent, to communicate. Emma started calling him by his first name, then one day, shyly called him Dad. Daniel cried in his car that night. Claire saw him through the window and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been wrong to hope. 6 months later, Daniel sold his mansion. He bought a smaller home closer to Claire and Emma. He cut back his hours, started therapy, started learning how to be human again. And Claire, who had spent years holding everything together alone, learned that sometimes letting someone in isn't weakness. It's courage. Now, let me ask you something. Do you think Claire should have told Daniel about Emma from the beginning? Or was her silence justified given how he treated her? What would you have done in her position? And if you were Daniel, could you forgive yourself for what you missed? These are not easy questions. And that's the point. This story is not about villains and heroes. It's about two people who made choices based on fear, pride, and pain. And about a little girl who became the bridge between what was broken and what could still be healed. Sometimes the people we overlook are not beneath us. They're simply waiting to be seen. And sometimes the truth arrives late, but still arrives. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life that you might have overlooked, then take a moment and share it. Leave a comment. Tell us how it made you feel. And if you believe that love, real love, is not about perfection, but about showing up even when it's hard, then you'll want to hear what we have coming next. Because every person has a story, and some of them will change the way you see the world. Subscribe so you don't miss.